Okay, this is the Tzurva Me'Rabbanan Shir number 4. As we continue Hilchas Shabbos, we are inching our way to Shabbos, but we are not there yet. Again, we are using the Tzurva Me'Rabbanan Lax Family Edition Sefer, the Weiss Family volume number 16. Feel free to get a copy and join us following along in the Torah Shebechsav, so to speak, as we talk about the Torah Shebal Peh. And we have spoken about everything before Shabbos. We have spoken about Hadlakas Neirish, which is before Shabbos and getting close to Shabbos. And now we are inching. Maybe we're at Shabbos already. Maybe we're not. That's going to be part of our question as we discuss Tosefes Shabbos and the issues that we will talk about in this year, which will be starting chapter 4, Shir number 4, which is on page 143 in the booklet. The mitzvah of Tosefes Shabbos, the mitzvah of adding on time to Shabbos, the proper way to be Makabel Shabbos, verbally or in thought or mentally. Am I allowed to ask someone who has not accepted Shabbos yet to do a malacha for me if I accepted Shabbos? What about mincha? What if I see the shul's running late? Do I have a mincha by myself? What do I do? And what about general early Shabbos and some of the issues that relate to that? So these are all, this year is so much to talk about, jam-packed topics, and we will do what we can as we follow along, and we'll add here and there to a number of the sources. So first of all, the mitzvah of Tosefes Shabbos. This seems to be an open and shut case. It's a beferish Gemara. It's an explicit Gemara. In a few places, you have it there in source number 1. Again, we're on page 145. Source number 1, the Gemara in Maseches Rosh Hashanah on Daf Tes. It's also the Gemara at the end of Maseches Yuma, because it has to do with Yom Kippur. First step, the Gemara tells us, V'nisem es nafsho seichem b'tisha. You shall afflict yourself on the 9th day of Tishrei. Ask the Gemara, on the 9th day of Tishrei, Yachol b'tisha. We know Yom Kippur is on the 10th day of Tishrei. Tamalomar ba'erev. It says ba'erev, only after the 9th. I ba'erev yachol mishetach shach. You might think it has to start only the night of Tamalomar b'tisha, but it says the 9th. So what do? So haketzad maschil u'misane mibod yom. We start fasting before the down, before Shkia, before sunset. We add on to the Kodesh, going into the Chol and adding on, that's Tosefes, adding on to the day. Again, when Kedusha in general, just a hashkafic point, Kedusha can never stay in its limited state. It expands out. Kedusha expands in place. The Beis Hamikdash expands out into Yerushalayim, into all of Eretz Yisrael, and in time it expands out as well. Says the Gemara. So we know there's a concept of Tosefes Yom Kippur to start early. So I know when Yom Kippur starts, because it says on the 9th. How do I know that even at the end of Yom Kippur, Motzah Yom Kippur, to add on to Yom Kippur? Tamalomer me erev ad erev. So we know there's a mitzvah of Tosefes Yom Kippur before and after. Ein li'elav Yom Kippurim. I only know this is Yom Kippur. Shabbosos b'nayad. How do I know this applies to every Shabbos? Tamalomar tishbesu. Yomim tovim minayin tamalomar Shabbatchem. So the Gemara's maskana seems to be haketzad kol makom sheish bo shvus mosifin michol ala kodesh. Whenever there is a shvus, an isser malacha, so we are mosif michol ala kodesh. So this is the Gemara, and the simple pshat of the Gemara is that it applies. Yom Kippur was the starting point, but then the Gemara expanded it to Shabbos and to Yom Kippur. This is how many Rishonim paskin. The Rif and Rov Rishonim and the Rush quote that there is a mitzvah of Tosefes on Yom Kippur and on Shabbos and on Yontif. The mystery is the Rambam. The Rambam only has Tosefes Inui Yom Kippur. The Rambam in Hilchos Shvisas Aser, not in Hilchos Shabbos. Nowhere in Hilchos Shabbos does the Rambam explicitly talk about Tosefes, but in Hilchos Shvisas Aser says the Rambam, Kishem, source number 2, Hilchos Shvisas Aser, Kishem is supposed to be Malacha Bein Bayom Bein Balayla, just like there's an Isser Malacha day and night, so too there's Inui day and night. Vitzarech lahosif michal ala kodesh, and one has to add on to the kodesh. B'knisaso b'tziaso shene'emar v'inisim es nafsho seichem b'tisha lachodesh be'erev. You shall afflict yourselves on the 9th, and the Rambam quotes the drasha. The Rambam only quotes this by Inui of Yom Kippur. The Beis Yosef points this out. It says, interesting, nowhere in Hilchos Shabbos, nowhere in Hilchos Yantif, the Rambam seems to only have it by Yom Kippur. He must hold like other Tanoim that use those extra words that the Gemara darshaned for other drushes. But either way, it's a very big chiddush. The Tur also omits mentioning it, but his father, the Rosh, has it, and the Shulchan Aruch has it, and therefore we paskin that Tosefes Yom Kippur is a Tosefes Shabbos. Tosefes Yantiv is a mitzvah daraisa. There are suggestions. Does the Rambam hold that it's at least derabanan or nothing? Right? The Beis Yosef seems to understand that the Rambam holds nothing. Right? It's not even a mitzvah derabanan, because why else would the Rambam not mention it? Others, the Bir Halacha assumes in source number 6 in Reis Samach Aleph, Demi derabanan afilu l'Rambam mitzvah lahosef am b'chol ha'kodesh. It has to be that the Rambam holds of some type of Tosefes, and that's quoted in Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch and Reis Samach Aleph, you don't have it in front of you, but the Shulchan Aruch and Reis Samach Aleph is interesting. His lashon, his phrase is Reis Samach Aleph, Yesh Omrim shetzarech lahosef michol ala kodesh. Siv Beis. Why Yesh Omrim? So the Bir Halacha says because he's having covered for the Rambam. The Rambam doesn't quote it. So yes, the Shulchan Aruch is quoting it at the Rosh and the Rif, but he quotes Yesh Omrim to be merames that the Rambam for some reason doesn't quote it. There is a creative idea from the Pri Megadim about why the Rambam doesn't quote it. The Pri Megadim says maybe the Rambam does quote it. What do you mean the Rambam does quote it? He doesn't quote it. Maybe he does quote it because you have to know another Rambam. There is a Rambam that says in Hilchos Tumas Meis that we know there's a principle called Safek D'Oraisa L'Chumra. When there's a suffix about a din daraisa, one has to be machmer, one goes l'chumra. The Rambam says it in more than one place, but in Hilchos Tumas Meis and elsewhere, that din is a din darabanan, meaning suffix daraisa l'kula mi daraisa. On a daraisa level, l'kula. It's a chumra darabanan to be machmir by a daraisa. Suffix daraisa l'chumra mi darabanan. Says the Pri Megadim. Now look in the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos elsewhere says in Paraches that if one does malacha during Ben Hashmashos, one is going to get malchus. Ben Hashmashos Friday, Motzei Shabbos, one's going to get malchus. What do you mean malchus? Ben Hashmashos twilight is a suffix. Says the Pri Megadim, that's the Rambam Tosefes. That's the Rambam Tosefes. Really, you shouldn't be chayiv malchus because suffix Ben Hashmashos, it should be lakula. The fact that you're chayiv achatos, which reflects a din daraisa, that itself is the Rambam's Tosefes during Ben Hashmashos. Okay, that's his chiddush. Others say maybe it's only derabanan. Others say he doesn't hold of it. But either way, we paskin. The Shulchan Aruch says Yesh Omrim. Oh, you have it there in source number 7. I'm sorry. Yesh Omrim shetzarech lahosef michol ala kodesh. I just added in the Bir Halacha about why he uses Yesh Omrim. And the Bagad Avram says there v'havi mitzvahs asay da'oraisa. This is a mitzvahs asay. So that's going into Shabbos. And then there's going out of Shabbos. Ma'achrin tfilas arvis, says the Shulchan Aruch in Reis Sadi Gimel, kedei lahosef michol ala kodesh. That's also, by the way, why we say Vihi Noam. We say Vihi Noam. We'll get to this, but Hashem, in tfilas of Shabbos, to add on a few seconds even. A few seconds. We try to add on to Shabbos as much as we can. There's an interesting comment, I think it's from the Bal Yisod V'Shoresh HaAvoda. We know that Gehenim has a respite on Shabbos, right? It's a break, and that's why we say Tzedakah L'Tzedek towards the end of Shabbos, because Tzedakah Kadin, because the neshamas are going back. What zmanim do they hold of Shabbos in Gehenim? What zman do they hold? So whatever zman that a person held in this world, that's the zman. So if we're marich, if we're mosif on Shabbos in this world, that's going to benefit for us. That's going to benefit for us in this world and in the next world. Fascinating. Okay, so this is the Kazab of Tosefes. There is a major question in Lumdus. What exactly does Tosefes mean? What does it mean? Meaning, let's start with the halacha. L'may nafkamina. I make, I daven on Shabbos. I come home. Let's say I made early Shabbos. Do I have to make sure? Is it Shabbos yet? Do I have to make sure to eat a kazayas of my meal after it gets dark because that's Shabbos? Or no? I davened. I was B'kabel Shabbos. It's Shabbos. In other words, does it mean when I'm Mosif Mishchol ala Kodesh, does that mean that I have the power to make the calendaric day earlier, so to speak? It's Mamish Shabbos for all intents and purposes? Or, no, I have a Kabbalah, maybe I'm a Kabbalist or Malacha, I'm a Kabbal certain Yehugim, but not that it is actually Shabbos yet. This seems to be two understandings in all the Mefarshim in the Rishonim and going through the Poskim. We'll start with the Rishonim, right? The Mishnah tells us at the beginning of Arei Psachim, the beginning of the second parak of Psachim. You have it there in source number 10. Erev Psachim Samach LaMincha Lo Yochal Adam Ad Shetechshach. A person should not eat on Erev Pesach. Why? Because, as we know, Rashi quotes, you have to eat matzah with a taiva. You have to eat a matzah with a big appetite. Mishum hidur mitzvah. It's hidur mitzvah. Rav Asher Weiss, in one of his pieces, I think, on Parshas B'Shalach, where he talks about hidur mitzvah, discusses two categories of hidur mitzvah. We're familiar with hidur mitzvah, glorifying a mitzvah in the chefza. Right, to have a beautiful Daled Minim, to have a beautiful Sefer Torah, to have a beautiful talis. But there are a number of examples of hidur mitzvah in the Maisa. In the Maisa, I hear, you're going to eat matzah with a greater hislavus, with a greater excitement, if I don't eat all day. And that's Rashi and the Rashbam say that's hidur mitzvah, because it beautifies the mitzvah. The matzah is the same matzah, but it's the act that's different. Hidur mitzvah in the Maisa. So this is not eating on Erev Pesach. As Tosfos, Acha Techshach, Tosfos says, Makshin on Tosfos, Psachim Sadites, Amai Yitzrach Acha Techshach, Pshita. What do you mean? You shouldn't eat till it gets dark? Obviously, you can't eat matzah till it gets dark. The mitzvah is at night. V'od, and the Gemara says, what is this doing? Tosfos says, what is this doing here? Dafkim Sachim. So explains the Rimi Korvil, one of the Bali Tosfos. The Gabi matzah dafka binach techshach. Matzah dafka, you have to wait till night, Seisak Ochavim, the stars come out. Because matzah requires nighttime. Aval Suda Shabbos v'yamim tovim, matzi achalo b'mod yom. But Shabbos and Yontif meals, if it's not matzah, din dar mitzvah daraisa, you could eat it mibod yom when it's not nighttime. Tosfos says beferish that the Suda Shabbos and Yontif does not have to be done at night. It can be done during Tosefes, which means, according to Tosfos, the Tosefes has the same halachic status as Shabbos. Tosefes Shabbos is Shabbos. Tosefes Yontif is Yontif. And Tosfos in Ksubis seems to have the opposite approach. The Gemara in Ksubis, source 13, Daf Mem Zayin, comes up with an ukimta with a explanation of a case which is not our issue now, but the Gemara says, maybe he got married or she got married during Yontif, Shabbos and Yontif. So Tosfos says Shabbos and Yontif. Okay, let's focus on Yontif. Yontif, kinyanim on Shabbos. We're not going to do with that now. But Yontif, you're not allowed to get married on Yontif. Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. The Gemara tells us in Moed Katan, you can't get married on Chol HaMoed. It sounds really nice. Everybody's off anyway. I'll get married then. Everybody ought to come to the wedding. You can't do that. Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. So how could the Gemara here suggest that you got married on Yontif? Says Tosfos, what it really means is you got married during Tosefes Yontif. And Tosefes Yontif doesn't have the halacha of Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. It has an Isser Malacha, which is what the Gemara was interested in. But it doesn't have the halacha of Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, meaning Tosfos and Ksubis sounds like it's not really Shabbos yet. The calendaric day did not come. According to Tosfos and Ksubis, maybe you would not be able to eat the meal early. Right? And this is what Reb Elchanan discusses, Reb Kovach Shiurim, Reb Elchanan Wasserman, one of the star students of both Reb Chaim Brisker and the Chafetz Chaim. So he connects this machlokas to the two ways of understanding Tosefes. Lamaisa, we try to be machmir. The Magen Avram quotes in Reis Lamach Zayin in Surah 16 to try to eat a kazayis at night. But me'ikar adin, it seems like one would be able to eat it earlier, and there are many other examples. The ones that, again, this is not in your booklet, but if you want to look it up, the ones that made this really famous and screamed about it is the Taz and the Marshal. And there are 3 Taz and Marshals, one by Hilchas Shabbos, but where they really talk about it is in Hilchas Sukkah. Hilchas Sukkah in Taf Reish Samach Ches. Tafrei Samaches. But first the Marshal of Shlomo Luria, who lived right before the Taz. Marshal lived in the 1500s. The Taz was the 1600s. So the Marshal writes in a tshuva. Right, Marshal lived in Poland. So what happens? Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres, what's the halacha? The halacha of Shmini Atzeres, the Gemara says, Yisube masvinan biruchilim uvarchinan. You sit in a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres and Chutz La'aretz, but you don't make the bracha of Leishe Basukah, because it's Sveika Diyoma. So you have to sit in the sukkah, maybe it's Hoshana Rabbah, but you don't make a bracha, because that's a bizayon to Shmini Atzeres. So that's the halacha. Says the Marshal, you're not allowed to make early Shmini Atzeres. You have to make sure you wait till night, very night. Why? Because, says the Marshal, if it's not nighttime yet, then you have a serious shaila about the bracha. You're sitting in a sukkah. It's light outside. You're not making a bracha of leishi basukah. Says the Marshal. That is very difficult. Tahamisifin amarti lo davar reku. The chula, let me read you the line. He says, Lola omro ein roy. You can't not say a bracha of leishi basukah. Dalama yigara bracha mechuyeves. Nihit the bracha zina ma'akvos hana b'di'eved. Aval lechuyuve atzmo bebracha then olecho basukah ba'od yom v'lo omro avon gadolu. The ain't shayach lomar. And don't tell me, says the Marshal, Kivan shemosifin michol ala kodesh over hayom. It's a new day. Ze'eno, it's wrong. I don't believe in that. The Marshal continues. And the Taz in Tafrei Samaches quotes the Marshal and says, "V'av she'in mashivin ha'ari la'achar moso." Even though you don't wake up the lion after the lion has died. That's a phrase which means I'm going to argue vehemently on this rabbi who already passed away and he can't answer me. So he says, I don't want to wake up the lion, and especially because I'm only a fox. Says the Taz, Kavachomer b'shul kamoni. But I have to tell you, I think it's wrong because he says, first of all, nobody mentioned this before the Marshal. Nobody, and we're in Chazal. Don't he make Shmini Atzeres early? Lama gazer tainis bechinam mishas knisa Shmini Atzeres. Fu hechrich tosefes bichol al kodesh daraisa. He says, number one, the rap, nobody mentioned it till now. And then he says, misvara. He says, devadai misha mosif michol al kodesh hu osa pitzivu torasenu akadosha. The same Torah that tells us to make to sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres on Chutz La'aretz, that's the halacha, tells us that there's a concept of Tosefes. It's the next day. That's the Taz and the Marshal. This could be, Rav Soloveitchik even suggested, maybe it's even a question in the Gemara. Brachas Chav Zayin. The Gemara there says that Rav used to daven early, and the Gemara says, did he make Kiddush early or not? That's a suffix. Brachas Chav Zayin. Omer Kedusha Alakos? Oh, Eina Omer Kedusha Alakos. What's that suffix? Rav Soloveitchik said maybe it's about this issue. He davened early, he could daven early. But could you even make Kiddush? Maybe the suffix is, how do you view Tosefes? How do you view Tosefes? And one other makar, and then we'll go on to the next piece. Again, we can spend the rest of this year on this, but we won't. The Nitziv has a tshuva in the Meshav Davar in Chelik Beis Siman Ayin Gimel. The case was a woman lit candles. It was Erev Yantif. She lit candles. And after she lit candles, she heard that a relative of hers died. So she immediately sat Shiva. She sat down for 5 minutes on the floor. And then, after Yantif, they asked the Nitziv, do I have to continue sitting Shiva? Because if you sat Shiva before Yantif, then Yantif breaks Shiva. If you didn't start, then you have to start afterwards. So the Nitziv says, better if you would have asked me, should you have sat Shiva in those 5 minutes? Because that's dependent on this question. Whether the Tosefes is really a calendaric day coming earlier, then the Shiva is nothing because it's Yantif already. Or it's just a Kabbalah of an Isser Malacha, but it is not actually Yantif. So that's the Nitziv. Again, there's a major topic, but this is Tosefes, Shabbos, Yantif, and Yom Kippur. We continue. How much time is needed for Tosefes? Right, we said it, you have to add on. Is there an amount? So Tosfos in Rosh Hashanah Daf Tes says, no, Kol Shehu. Sagi but Tosefes Mashu. Just a little bit. How much a little bit? So the Chai Adam says half an hour. Chai Adam is source 19. Rabbi Avram Danzig, V'kol Adam Chai al Kapanim Lefrosh Bi Malacha, Lefachos Chatzi Shah Kodem Alayla. Half an hour. Kitzorach Losav Ma'an Michol Ala Kodesh, Ben B'Knisaso, Ben Siyaso. Half an hour. Where does he get this from? He doesn't quote where he gets it from. But it's in the Rishonim. The Shid Mekubetzes in Beitza Daf Lamed quotes that, and Rabbeinu parrots there also. Half an hour. They quote that Chatzi Shah, half an hour. So this must be where the Chai Adam, or if you didn't know it, this is where he intuited that it should be. Where does half an hour come from? If you look in Be'ikvei Hatzon, one of Rav Shechter's Sfarim, in Siman Yudalid, which is all about Kol de Tikkun Ke'en Da'araisa Tikkun, then many mitzvahs d'Rabban, halachas d'Rabbanan, the rabbis modeled and patterned after Dinim Da'araisa. And Rav Soloveitchik was very into this, finding the basis in the Torah for Dinim D'Rabbanan. Rav Shechter there quotes that there's a halacha of Samach L'Mincha. We're going to learn later on about, in a couple of minutes, about davening, doing something else, Samach to a mitzvah that you have to do. Samach L'Mincha. What's Samach L'Mincha? So that Din D'Rabbanan of not getting involved in other things before Mincha, before some other mitzvah I have to do, is half an hour. Where did the Rabbanan know that from? Where do they know that Samuch is half an hour? So suggests Rav Shechter, maybe that's backwards. They looked for, don't say that Tosefes is half an hour, comes from Samuch, it's the opposite. When the Rabbanan got Samuch L'Mincha, D'Rabbanan, so now the Shid Mekubetzes, Rabbeinu parrots were wondering where'd they get that from? What's the Daraisa that they paralleled it afterwards? So maybe that's where they got Tosefes, is a half an hour. That's where they got Tosefes half an hour. But either way, this is what we try to do. But many quote in the Menuchas Ava, Rav Moshe Levi quotes one of the great Sephardic poskim. He says the minhag is 20 minutes before Shkia, or the Mishnah Berurah quotes 20 minutes before Shkia. Where does this come from? So the Piskei Teshuvos quotes in source 21 that there is, maybe we'll talk about it one day, a huge discussion of Shkia and Seis, the Vilna Gaon and Rabbeinu Tam and others, but there is a Shita of the Yereim, Rabbi Elazar Metz, who's a Talmud of Rabbeinu Tam, who has a unique Shita, which we don't paskin like, but he says Bein Hashmashos is before Shkia. Bein Hashmashos is before Shkia. And how long is Bein Hashmashos? Bein Hashmashos is the time it takes to walk 3/4 of a mil. So if you take the longest shear of a mil, again, this is not our topic now, just parenthetically, the longest shear of a mil is 24 minutes, and 3/4 is 18 minutes. So to be machmir for that shita of the Yereim, that's why Klal Yisrael has the minhag of lighting candles 18 minutes before Shkia. Not because Chai, it's a nice number, but that's where it comes from the Yereim. And the Mishnah Berurah says, therefore, you should be Makabel Shabbos, and the shul should write 20 minutes. Maybe light candles 20 minutes before, so you have 2 minutes of Tosefes. 2 minutes of Tosefes, that's what the Piskei Teshuvos also quotes. 20 minutes before, where does that come from? 18 minutes plus 2 minutes of Tosefes, that's where the minhag comes from to have that. So again, that's what we spoke about last week, about women automatically accepting. Again, men don't accept, then they have less, because they're going to daven mincha, but again, that's where it comes from. When's the earliest I could be Makabel Shabbos? What if I'm really frum? I want to accept Shabbos on Thursday. Doesn't work. Friday morning doesn't work. The earliest time is Plaga Mincha. The mid-time between Mincha Ketana, 9.5 hours, and the end of the day. The Ramah quotes in Reish Samach Aleph, you want to be Makdim, or Kabbalah of Shabbos be Plaga Mincha, Ve'elech HaRishus Biyado. Plaga Mincha is the earliest. Before that, one cannot, and it's even a Bracha Levatala. And that's why, especially on, let's say, summer Shabbosim, when the wife is normally ready to light candles. The husband goes to shul, the woman lights candles. But if a husband is davening as what's called a plag minyan, so he's going to daven mincha before plag, a woman has to make sure not to light until after plag mincha. That's why in some shul bulletins it says candles not before. Candles not before by the early Shabbosim. Right? What does it mean not before? So that's what the reason is, because you can't be Makabel Shabbos before that. So this is in terms of the lumdis of Tosefes and how much Tosefes is. How are you Makabel? How are you Makabel? What do I do? Tosefes. So we get to the next section. I'm on page 156 now. The proper method of fulfilling Tosefes Shabbos. So the Ritva says in Rosh Hashanah, in source 24 on Daf Tes, V'Tosefes zeh eina b'dvarim u'bitul malacha bilvad. It's not just about cessation, about not doing malacha. It's best to verbalize. Sheyosifenu b'dvarim shel kedusha o b'tfila o b'kiddush. Verbalize. So Kiddush Friday night, that's not Tosefes, because it's already Shabbos, right? That doesn't count to be Makabel Shabbos. So it's got to be before. The Rav C. Pesach Frank in the Mikroi Kodesh in source 26 thinks it's a machlokes between the Ritva and Tosfos. Tosfos in Rosh Hashanah implies that it's automatic. It's automatic without the verbal. The Ritva sounds like you should say something. Again, does he mean that if you don't say something, it's not automatic, and then not until Shabbos starts? Unclear. But either way, lichatchila, one should verbalize. The Ramah says in Hilchos Yom Kippur, in Tafresh Ches, in source 27, Ayin La'el, Taf Kuf Nun Gimel, Dim Kibel Belev, Lo Have Kabbalah. Right? You should really try to verbalize. Really try to verbalize, says the Ramah, but the Mishnah Berurah notes that even without verbalizing, a mental acceptance, which is what most do today, is enough. That a verbal Kabbalah is enough. But again, lechatchila, one should verbalize. Says the Shmir Shabbos, says Rav Neuwirth in source 29, in Perek Mem Vav. Kabbalah, remember, all of the Shmir Shabbos psukim that are quoted in this volume are from the second volume of the Shmir Shabbos, because it's all about the assays. The first volume is all about the Los Assays. That's the one that was redone before he was nifter, the big fat gray one. But the second volume is the one with all the assays. Says the Shmir Shabbos, Kabbalah Shabbos v'yantif, Eina al yedei prisha mi malacha greda. It's not just by not doing malacha. Elahi nasis ayidei dibur. It's through speech, verbal. Dahainu, she'omer b'peh she'makabel avas haShabbos. Say, verbalize. Amnam im lo hotzi b'svasav. If I didn't, elarak gomar belibo l'kabbalas haShabbos, but I accepted it. Harezu lo kabbalah. It counts. It counts. The yifrosh atzmo mikom malachos ha'asuros. Right. So that is the din. So again, one can use tefillah if it's early enough. One can use tefillah if it's early enough. The Shmir Shabbos continues and says if you're davening early enough and you're saying Boi B'Shalom, you're saying Bizmar Shili Shabbos early enough, so then one can be makabel through those words, those words. Most often, those are being said way after Shkia, and therefore it's not going to work. That, by the way, is why some people stand for L'Chadodi, some people stand for Mizbar Shili Shabbos, because that is the Kabbalah Shabbos. That's the Kabbalah Shabbos, and you want to be makabel the Shabbos. And that's why Avelim come in right then, right after Boi B'Shalom, because that's the Kabbalah Shabbos of the Tzibur, and that's when they rejoin the Tzibur in Shul. The Tzibur, getting to the next section, the Tzibur is makabel Shabbos, obviously in davening. We were just talking about being makabel Shabbos, and we'll get to a little bit later if one is davening mincha too late, and what he's supposed to do about Kabbalah Shabbos. We'll get to that. But the Aruch HaShulchan already quotes that the tzibur, if they're makabel Shabbos, so if I'm part of that tzibur, then I have to be makabel Shabbos too. What if I'm running late? What if I'm not there? What if I'm not there? The Aruch HaShulchan says, well, once Baruch Hu is said, that's the Kabbalah of the tzibur, and therefore one needs to be makabel Shabbos with that action of the tzibur. But the Aruch HaShulchan does note in the continuation of source number 31, if you're not part of the tzibur and you're yourself, so then there would be flexibility. You wouldn't be nigrar if you're not in shul. But avokan, if you're with the tzibur, so that's a more chamor type of Kabbalah. The Shulchan Aruch says, though, in Reish Sama Gimel, Imrov HaKabbalu Kal Kibul Am Shabbos, if most of the tzibur is makabel Shabbos, Hamiyot Nimshachin Achareim Balkarcha. If most of the tzibur is makabel Shabbos, then you're nigrar. If they're not doing malach anymore, you're running a little late. Again, if it's after Shkia, it's after Shkia. Then nothing to talk about. They don't need the tzibur for that. But even beforehand, if they're davening early, they're makabel Shabbos early, so then you are nigrar. Does this halacha apply to today? Probably not in most of our communities, because most of our communities have many different shuls. I'm planning to go to a different shul, even though the biggest shul in the new community was makabel Shabbos, but I'll go to the other shul. So explains the Menuchas Ava, says, no, you go by your shul. That's what we just quoted, the Shulchan Aruch. But if a city has many shuls, even if Rov they are not machriya, they don't force the minority. No, you go by your shul. But if your shul is be makabel, then you're stuck. How are you nigra? If one is in a place where there's only one shul, sometimes this comes up in the summers in the New York area. Somebody goes up to the countries. They're coming up to a bungalow colony, and there is only one minyan, and they're running late on a Friday, and they got stuck in traffic on Route 17. So they might have to park outside. You can't just drive through if everybody was makabel Shabbos already. So then, once you become part of that tzibur, so to speak, then one would have to hold of it. There is flexibility. Rav Moshe Feinstein has a line in one of his shuvas where he says, if the only reason people are being makabel Shabbos is for convenience purposes and not because they love Shabbos and they want more of Shabbos, then maybe the whole halacha of nigra doesn't apply. So in the summer, we're all makabel Shabbos early. Why? Because we love Shabbos so much. So why aren't we makabel Shabbos early in the winter? Haraya, it's a lot of it's convenience. You don't want to eat at 9:30 at night. So maybe the halacha, there's flexibility. Rav Moshe has that line in one of his shuvas. Maybe that halacha wouldn't apply bisman hazeh. Good, and he talks about other details here as well. What happens if, okay, I wasn't nigrar, but other people were makabel Shabbos and I wasn't? Could they ask me to do malacha? We know there's a halacha of Amir La'akum. I'm not allowed to ask a goy to do malacha on Shabbos for me. What about a Jew asking a Jew who was not makabel Shabbos yet? So the Rashba says, it's fine. It's mutter. Right, what happens often? A woman lights candles. We learned last week, makabel Shabbos automatically. She has somebody else in the house, turn off the oven, turn off the light. To Mehashamina, says the Rashba, Kufnun Aleph, source 35. The Yisrael Shekiba Love Shabbos Kodem Shechashecha, a Jew that was makabel Shabbos Kodem Chashecha. After Chashecha, it's Shabbos for everybody. But if it's Kodem Chashecha, Mutter Lo Mal Yisrael Chaveira Lasos Lo Malacha Plonis. You could ask your friend to do a malacha for you. Hoel Finasas Beheter Lo Sosa. It's not Shabbos for him. If it's not Shabbos for him, there's no problem for him to do malacha. And that is what the Shulchan Aruch paskins like this Rashba. Yesh omrim shemisha kibo lav Shabbos kodem shechashecha Mutter lomer liyisrael chavir lasas malacha. This is in Reis Samach Gimel. Remember, the Shulchan Aruch is written in chronological order. Reis Samach Aleph is alakas neiris. Reis Samach Gimel it's like Kabbalah Shabbos. You were makabel and he wasn't. You could ask him to do malacha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the kivan shel chaver mutter ain't isra amira shayach bazeh. There is no problem, and that is why we know women. The Shmir Shabbos quotes in source 38: women who accepted Shabbos after they lit, they are allowed to ask a family member, mutter lahem lomer liyisrael acher terem shekibal of Shabbos lazos averim kol davar, anything, even something that's nechshav daraisa, afilu davar sheish ba'asiyaso mishum misr Torah. Right? Let's say I made early Shabbos and I'm walking home from shul and my neighbors didn't make early Shabbos. I could ask them l'chadchila to come into my house to do malacha. V'ushat tzibur terem shekibal of Shabbos. Tzibur hamaktim l'kabel Shabbos v'chulu mutter. They could say to somebody who's doing a later one. That is the Shulchan Aruch and that is the halacha. What's not in the booklet here, I'll just add. Maybe it'll come up later. And that is the Ramah says in Reis Samach Gimel. The same thing applies to Motzi Shabbos. Motzi Shabbos. If I finish Shabbos and my friend didn't finish Shabbos yet, he's allowed to ask me to do malacha for him, even though it's still Shabbos for him, but it's not Shabbos for me. But that is controversial. The Lavush there, the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Lavush in short, but if you look into the Lavush's Lashon, the Lavush is very not happy. He says, don't compare going into Shabbos and going out of Shabbos. Ein anidon dom elaraya, v'lo dami iyule Shabbos la'afuke Shabbos. Don't compare going into Shabbos, going out of Shabbos. To be Iyule Shabbos, going into Shabbos. This gets back to what we were just talking about. Hadavar Tali Benidro. Tosefes going in, that's a personal Kabbalah. It's not really Shabbos yet. That's why you're allowed to ask someone else. The Kibul Olav Kedusha Shabbos. V'nuchalomar Shezek Kibo Olav Zelo Kibo Olav. Avo Ba'afuke Shabbos. But going out of Shabbos, Shekvar Nasar Alav Hakol B'Yom HaShabbos. It's fully Shabbos for him. V'u mamshich b'kedushaso balayla. Kol yisur nimshachim mimo lo shayach lomar. Chutru miksason lo hutru. You don't say the same. So it's a major machlokas, the Ramah and the Lavush, regarding whether that halacha of going into Shabbos applies about going out of Shabbos. Okay. We continue now with the next topic. Next related section, I should say. Now on page 163. What about mincha? Mincha sometimes gets a little tricky here. We know the halacha is that you have to daven mincha before a certain time. Says the Shulchan Aruch in Reis Samach Gimel. As we know, im ana the kibel shah. So we know mincha has to be daven before Erev, before Shkia, let's say. That is what the Chachamim hold. Says the Shulchan Aruch, what happens if the Tzibur, I ran into shul late, and all of a sudden I got there so late that the Tzibur is davening about to say Baruch Hu, and I answer Baruch Hu, guess what? Can't daven mincha anymore. Imana v'kibel Shabbos imam eno yochel ispal tfilas chol el ispal arish time. You daven two ma'arives, and the Mishnah Berurah explains Shei ana Baruch Hu. If you said Baruch Hu, that's Ma'ariv, and that's Shabbos. And therefore, you don't have a takana, and therefore, you're just going to daven two Ma'arivs. What happens if you see the shul is running late? The shul is running late. What should you do about mincha? Meaning, what do you mean running late? If they're going to finish the Shmir Shabbos Paskins, if you're going to be able to finish the Tefillah Balachash, at least before Shkia, that's okay. Then fine, daven with them, and before Chazaras Hashatz, just say to yourself, I'm a Kabbalah Shabbos. But what if you're not even going to be able to do the Tefillah Balachash before? Says the Shmir Shabbos and other poskim, better to daven mincha by yourself beforehand. V'emu roeh shatzibur, source 41. Shatzibur asid l'sayim es tfilas hamincha balachash. Even the quiet Shmona Esrei, they're going to be finishing after Shkia. Mutav sheyispalo b'yachidus v'yakabel as haShabbos lefnei Shkia. Because if you daven mincha, it means it's still weekday. And if you're going to keep davening mincha till after Shkia, zero tosefes. So says the Shmir Shabbos, better to daven mincha alone. But there are four other options that you have in front of you that we will see. The Tzitz Eliezer does not think that you're forced into that. Tzitz Eliezer says maybe in our case, where Kibel Alav Shabbos biyachid v'nizkal abayit shelo ispala mincha yochel Shabbos ispala adena mincha shalcho. If you're a yachid, you can still have mincha afterwards, right? The Tzitz Eliezer says that even though the Shulchan Aruch says otherwise, the Shulchan Aruch may be that one can't recite mincha after accepting Shabbos is only when the whole tzibur accepted Shabbos earlier. But here the whole tzibur is with you. So it could be that you could still daven mincha. That's Tzitz Eliezer. Rav Ovadia and the Chazon Ovadia says in source 43, maybe you can have a partial. Maybe you can have a partial Tosefes, which again relates to what we said at the beginning of this year. So it says Rav Ovadia, Venira, Ma'acher L'spala Mincha Be'erev Shabbos, if somebody's running late, Afim Misayim Mincha Achar Shkia, Lo Bita Mitzvos Tosefes. Wow. Even if you finish Mincha afterwards, you were not Mevatel Tosefes, as long as you haven't been doing Malacha. And for sure mentally, but what if I'm about to daven mincha, because I know it's 3 minutes before Shkia, I'm going to finish afterwards. Says Ravadia, you can mentally think, I'm makabel Shabbos l'gabi yisur malacha. You can say that. Which again is assuming one side of our Hakira earlier, that it's not mamish the calendaric day, because that simple understanding, you have to go all or nothing, but it's a Kabbalah. So you can be makabel certain portions, you can be makabel isurim without being makabel for mincha. Kivan sheikar mitzvah tosefes, after all the ikar tosefes is shvisa mimalacha, so one can be mechalek regarding that. The Pnini Halacha, Rav Malamed says, well, maybe you could also, if you see things, it's coming, you could think about it. Not mechalek between the different parts, but he says the minhag. The minhag is, even though Shkia is coming, you didn't daven mincha, should be makabel Shabbos bedibur or b'machshava, and then daven mincha, even without the explicit differentiating between the Isser Malacha and the mincha. And finally, in the Yalkut Yosef, he says, you know what? As long as it's within 13 minutes after Shkia, you're okay. And this is L'shitaso, the sugya that I alluded to before. How much time do you have after Shkia for certain halachas, like Shalashudas, like Hefsek Tara, like other halachas? Rav Ovadia often says 13 minutes. Rav Moshe has 9 minutes, but that's what the Yalkut Yosef says here too. V'tzibra magib erev Shabbos lebeis haknesses. They see us after Shkia, they can still daven with Chazaras Hashaz after Shkia, and to be makabel Shabbos within 13 minutes, because it's a sveka. According to the Gaonim, it's according to Rabbeinu Tam, it's still Vada Yom, and even according to the Gra, it's Safek Yom, Safek Laila. Okay, so either way, this is in terms of when one is running late. So Lamaisa, if one is running, comes to shul, and the shul is going to finish afterwards. So if you can finish the quiet Shemona Esrei before Shkia, then do that, and then just say to yourself quietly, I'm a Kabbalah Shabbos, or think I'm a Kabbalah Shabbos. If they're not even going to do that, one might want to daven mincha biyachidus. That's what some poskim say. If one doesn't want to do that, then just think even before mincha, I'm a Kabbalah Shabbos for Isser Malacha and not for mincha. One has the ability to do that. Okay, moving right along in terms of Tosefes, the early Shabbos. The early Shabbos generally only comes up in the summer months. And we get into the problem that's asked on the first daf in Shas, the first Tosfos in Shas, in Brachas, and the Rush at the beginning of Brachas talks about it. The Tarti Desasri problem. What's that? Let's get into the sugya. So we know the Mishnah tells us in Maseches Brachas that there are 2 times machlokes what one could daven mincha, when one could daven mincha until. One daven mincha until Plaga Mincha, that's Rabbi Yehuda, or there's one daven mincha until Shkia, right? That is the Rabbanan. Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. And the maskana of the Gemara on the next daf Chav Zayin in source 47, is David Kamar Ovid, David Kamar Ovid. This is one of those few areas in halacha that it's up to you. There's no psak given. You could either follow Rebbe Yehuda, which means mincha before Plaga Mincha and Ma'ariv after Plaga Mincha, or the Rabbanan, mincha before Shkia and Ma'ariv after Shkia. Remember, I once heard there's a story about the Kleisenberger Rebbe who once went to the kever of Rebbe Yehuda Bar Ilai. Rabbi Yehuda in Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai is buried right outside of Tzfat. You go down the mountain outside of Tzfat, that's where his kever is. Rabbi Shimon, his bar plukta, is in Meron, right near there also. So you have Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, both near each other up there. So one time he went with his Chasidim to daven mincha by Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, and then the next day, and he stayed somewhere, and the next day he said, we have to go back. And they went back, and he started crying at the kever. And they said, Rebbe, what's going on? He says, we daven mincha yesterday by Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, and we daven mincha after Plaga Mincha. We're mamish by Rabbi Yehuda's kever, and we daven mincha like the Rabbanon. I felt it was a bizayin. So I had to go back. I'd ask Mechila, what am I doing? But anyway, that's the story of a tzaddik. So we have machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Fine. The Shulchan Aruch says, you have a choice, but you should pick one that you always do. You can't pick and choose. You can't even pick and choose different days. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I'll go like Rabbi Yehuda. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I'll go like Rabbi Shimon or like the Rabbanan. You shouldn't do that. Shulchan Aruch says in 48, and this is in Reis Samach Zayin. I'm sorry, even before that, the Shulchan Aruch in Hilchas Mincha, which is not in front of you, says you should always, go by, have a certain consistency. But the Shulchan Aruch says, even though one should have consistency, which is a machlokes rishonim, and he paskins like the ones that say you should always have consistency, the Shulchan Aruch says on Friday night it might be different. Makdimin lispala arvis yoser miyibosachol. You could be makdim on Friday. Ubeplaga mincha yochal lahaluk lekabel Shabbos vilos arvis. Gedaven early on Friday night. Right, that's the Shulchan Aruch. The Magen Avraham is not so happy. He thinks that the Gemara sounds like you're not machalek between weekday and Shabbos, but that is the shita of the Shulchan Aruch, and that's generally what we paskin, that if one wants to switch on a certain day, you got a mincha ma'ariv minyan, that's plag, that one can do that, even in general, against the Shulchan Aruch on a weekday. But surely Friday night, even if one davens with shkia in between every day of the week, one could daven with plag on Friday. The question is that there is a, what we have been talking about now is choosing days. But the Tosfos and the Rush and all the Rishonim wonder, but what about the minhag that some have of, I shouldn't say the minhag, the reality that some have, what's called a tarti desasri, an inner contradiction. Sometimes there are those that have a mincha after plag, like the Rabbanan, and Ma'ariv before Shkia, like Rabbi Yehuda. How do you combine that on the same day? That's trickier. That's what's called tarti desasri, an inner contradiction, and that comes up often in the summer months when a shul, for convenience sake, wants to daven 7 o'clock the whole summer, 7 o'clock mincha. So that's a little tricky, because if you want to go like the Rabbanan or Rabbi Yehuda, fine, but plag moves, and therefore that's a little tricky because sometimes that's after plag and before shkia. So l'chadchila, one should definitely be makbid to have a plag minyan, and in Eretz Yisrael, there's no such thing as a kavua early Shabbos. Maybe he will find one, but generally there's early Shabbos, there's plag minyanim, and the regular minyanim. Again, it doesn't get as late as it does in a number of places in Chutz La'aretz. But what's the defense? Are the defenses of doing this tarti desasri? So there are those. The Magen Avraham quotes, well, maybe Friday night is different. I don't know if I'm going to give you the kula of during the week, but at least Friday night, because we know every tefillah is connected, karbanos tiknum, in source number 51, now on page 170, and we know Shachris is connected tamid shel Shachar, and Mincha is connected tamid shel Bein Harabayim, and Ma'ariv is connected, the Hektar Chalav and Veivarim, the burning of the fats in the limbs, that wasn't done on Shabbos. That was done before Shabbos, any leftovers. So therefore, says the Magen Avraham, maybe that's a remes to do it beforehand, earlier on Friday night. And therefore, it's done earlier. So maybe that's a flexibility on a Friday night. Others say sometimes you could work out the plag of the Magen Avraham. What is the Magen Avraham? Again, not our topic now, but there was a major machlokas between the Magen Avraham and the Gra. How do you calculate the what's called shos manios, hours of the day? You split up the day into 12 equal parts, and each 1/12 of the day is considered a halachic hour, shos manios. Wonderful. We are all familiar with that concept. But how do you calculate the day? Is it from dawn till tzeis, or is it from sunrise to sunset? So the Gra says sunrise to sunset. Right, and that's what the Chazon Ish says. That's the minhag olam, and that's why Sofsman Kriyishba, Sofsman Tefillah, we go by the Gra, which is generally later. The Magen Avraham says you go by dawn until Tzeis, which has a larger day, and but sometimes the plag of the Magen Avraham works out for the 7 o'clock minyanim. Okay, another answer. Some say the Rambam says because Tefillas Arvis Rishus, that's why you can be more flexible by Ma'ariv. All these are defenses. L'chadchila, one should definitely try not to rely entirely on the Sasri. Again, Rabbi Simon is quoted in 54 with a couple of the defenses. But there is a very interesting pre-Yitzchak, Rav Yitzchak Petterberger, in Chelik Beis Siman Tes, if you want to look it up. He says, I have a possibility, I have a creative possibility. Why Friday night it would be okay? Why? Because when's the time for Shacharis? We know the Sofsman Tefillah. When's the time for Mincha? We know when Mincha is, right? Until Shkia, or Plaga Mincha. What's the time for Ma'ariv? What's the language of the Mishnah? Ein la keva. Ein la keva. So the Gemara says what Ein la keva means, but the Gra on that Mishnah gives another pshat. What is Ein la keva? Ein la keva means Ma'ariv doesn't have its own time for davening. Ma'ariv is whenever you can't daven Shacharis or Mincha, that's when the time for Ma'ariv is. That's the Gra. Says the Pri Yitzchak. He's a contemporary of the Beis Halevi, 1800s. Says the Pri Yitzchak. On a weekday, let's say I daven mincha, and there's still 45 minutes left till Shkia. So if I ask myself, after 10 minutes after I daven mincha, is it still mincha time? The answer is yeah, it is mincha time, but I davened already. It is mincha time, but I davened already. It is mincha time, but I davened already. What about Friday night? I daven mincha, then I'm a Kabbalah Shabbos. Once I'm a Kabbalah Shabbos, it's no longer time for mincha. It's not mincha time anymore. It's Shabbos. So at this moment, right now, I can't daven mincha anymore. I can't daven shacharis. Guess what? I could daven ma'ariv. Amazingly creative shot of the Pri Yitzchak. Why dafka Friday night? Maybe there's flexibility in terms of the tarti desasri. Okay. Anyway, the last section we're going to talk about is, must a wife, page 172, must a wife accept Shabbos at the same time as her husband? So Rav Moshe says no. Rav Moshe meaning, let's say a husband is in shul and the wife is still, obviously it's not going to come up on a regular, a late Shabbos, because by the time the husband gets to the end of mincha, it's already Shkia. But let's say on an early Shabbos, husband goes to early Shabbos, the wife is still doing stuff in the house. Does she have to be careful about whenever Ma'ariv, Kabbalah Shabbos and shul is done, I have to stop working? So Rav Moshe says no. But l'chadchila, maybe you should try to finish by the time her husband finishes. Rav Vosner is more strong. He says no. A wife is meshubit and nigrar after her husband. The Shevet Alevi in 56. Lahalacha yir lanias daiti shoaisha nigrares acharei kabbalah shabbos shel baal barchu o mizber shel yom shabbos. So that is what should be done according to the Shevet Alevi. And the Sephardi poskim have the same machlokas. Rav Ovadia says she is not nigrar, while the Mamar Mordechai holds that she is nigrar after his wife. Lamaisa, as one of my Rebbeim once said, okay, you might not have to figure out exactly what time they're getting up to Ma'ariv, but if the husband's walking home from shul, he should look into the window and see if his wife lit candles yet. If she didn't light candles yet, he should stay outside, learn a couple of Mishnayos. Don't walk into a house where you have the husband and the wife. The wife is not Makabel Shabbos yet, and the husband is. So at least that much should be done in that case. In any case, once they get home, we spoke about having the meal afterwards, but there is another important halacha, the last one for now, and that is Kriya Shema. Kriya Shema, there are some halachas, even if we hold the stronger view of Tosefes, it's mamish the calendaric day early, there are some halachas that require Laila. Like that Tosfos and Arvi Psachim, Matzah requires Laila, Kriya Shema requires Laila. Kriya Shema requires Laila. So, early Shabbos, obviously it's not time for Kriya Shema yet. But generally, the halacha is, the Shulchan Aruch quotes in Hilchas Mincha Ma'ariv, in source 59, Reish Lamed Hey, Asur lahaskal lechel chatzi shah samach lezman. Kriya Shema shel arvis. I'm not allowed to start eating a meal within a half an hour. We used that before. Remember the Rav Shechter and the Tosefes, the Kein Daraisa tikkun. So Asur lahaskal, you can't start eating half an hour before. So 1 second. I'm in shul, I daven early. By the time I get home, I'm schmoozing with people on the way home. By the time I get home, if it's before a half an hour before Tzeis, if it's more than half an hour, so then I'm okay. Because the halacha is, if I start eating beheter, the Mishnah Berurah explains, if I start eating before half an hour before Tzeis like a chavim, then I can keep going, and then just say Kriya Shema afterwards. But sometimes, let's say I'm schmoozing, by the time I start sitting down for my meal, it's already within half an hour of Tzeis. So then, the Mishnah Berurah says, maybe you should wait. Maybe you should wait till Tzeis. Pashtus is, that's a big tercha de tzibura. And the reason you made early Shabbos is because you want to start eating. So, probably, yesh makom, the Mishnah Berurah ends off by saying, hanoeg lahakal yishmi amal lismoch. One should make an announcement. Please, let's not forget Kriya Shema so that somebody's going to remember. And in those cases, you should make it a practice that by benching, right before benching, right after benching, one should say Kriya Shema. Like just by Sfiras Omer also, we have the idea of reminding each other. So here too, we should remind each other to be able to say Kriya Shema. Again, there are those that might want to wait, but in general, Tircha Tzibura and Simcha and Onik Shabbos also is a factor, and therefore one should make sure to have in place something that will remind them. So remind them to light. Okay, these are the halachas. Again, Tosefes Shabbos has a lot of machshava related to it. Also, we should remember every special moment of Shabbos. Maybe just remember, I think the Chassam Sofer says that we always count, put at the end what we are most excited for. Now, let's say somebody has chalent. So sometimes, what do they like most in the chalent? The meat. They'll save the meat for last. They got ice cream, 3 different flavors. They'll save the best for last. You always count. So Shabbos is the end of the week. That's what we look forward to. That's what's exciting. And you always count towards what you're excited for. So we count, what's the end of our week? The end of our week is Shabbos. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Shabbos. Other nations, Shabbos is the a rest in order to be able to work during the week. No, we work during the week in order to get to Shabbos. So Shabbos, and we reflect that by having Tosefah Shabbos, by being excited. We don't just take the minimum, we maximize it for as much as we can. Have a wonderful, amazing day.